Gators Breakdown is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Joining me on this episode of Gators Breakdown is co-host and founder of ReadAndReaction.com. That's Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Will, we're following up our Kentucky preview with the Jim McElwain Bowl when Florida hosts Colorado State.
Hey man, the only thing that would be better is if they had Nussmeier as the offensive coordinator. If they'd hired him back over there. I don't think they did that though. So this game, so they might be able to score more than 20 points.
They do have a familiar face though, so of course we'll get to that. But most people know Mike Bobo is the head coach there at Colorado State. But before we get there, remember you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News for Jax sports team. That's news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Also, listen on iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube if you want the video version there. And follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Will, we did mention this is the Jim McElwain Bowl. This is a game when Florida hired Jim McElwain to be the coach to help with the buyout part of the contract. Florida scheduled Colorado State, and then Jim McElwain is not even head coach to see this game played in the swamp.
Well, I mean, he'd still be around if he hadn't been making up death threats and things like that. So I think Colorado State won in this whole endeavor because they got rid of McElwain and got the game with Florida, which certainly I'm sure that they're getting paid to come to Gainesville to play this game. But Colorado State is a legitimate opponent. This is not a cupcake. Game where they've scheduled the Citadel or something like that. This is a legitimate opponent, and I think that they're going to have to take them seriously as a legitimate opponent, particularly considering that they're going on the road a couple of weeks in a row after this, and certainly the Tennessee and Mississippi State games are going to be things that are at the forefront of the players' minds, and it's a place where you can see them potentially overlooking Colorado State.
Yeah, and also, like I mentioned, they have a guy leading their program in Mike Bobo who knows the Florida program. He's not going to be shell shocked by going to play Florida. All his years at Georgia, played at Georgia, offensive coordinator at Georgia under Mark Richt. He gets the job at Colorado State after Jim McElwain was hired at Florida, and they had their third straight 7-6 season last year, so they were expecting a little more under Bobo. It is his first head coaching gig after leaving Georgia, but this is a guy. Of course, it's Dan Mullen in his first year, so Bobo is not really going to know. There's not a lot of tape on Florida and Mullen, so it's not like he has a lot of tape to base anything off of. But he does know the program itself pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think we put a little bit too much stock in that, other than the fact that his players might really want to get one against Florida just because he's from Georgia and they know how much it means to him. But certainly I think 7-6 is not what people imagine coming off of some of the success that McElwain was having at Colorado State, because 3 straight years of 7-6 would not have flown with the Florida fan base when Jeremy Foley went out there to hire McElwain. I think there was some trepidation there anyway, but certainly McElwain had a much better track record at Colorado State than Bobo has thus far. Why that is something that they can probably answer better than we can. But I don't know that necessarily that the Bobo's doing a bad job, but I don't know that he's definitely been a home run hire by any means.
Yeah, and it probably could have been a better season last year. They played a really good Boise State team down to a 59-52 loss. They had 4 losses in the final 5 games last year, and that's how they ended up going 7-6. So it was looking good at one point, and then they just kind of faltered down the stretch. Their star quarterback Nick Stevens, he's gone. 3 all-conference linemen. Now a Cowboy wide receiver who was drafted, Michael Gallup. He was drafted by the Cowboys last spring in the NFL draft. Leading rusher Dalen Dawkins, but he's also gone as well. But the grad transfer KJ Carter Samuels is going to come in. So we'll see if he can be the guy that will end up leading this offense into getting Bobo over that 7-6 nod.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that they were a little bit unlucky in sort of the last second losses, but they were 2-3 in 1-score games, so it's not as if they didn't have a little bit of luck go in their favor as well. So, they were legitimately a 7-6 team, I think. If you look at it, the expected wins based on their point differential was 7.7, so maybe they underperformed a little bit. And they scored 434 points, which is 200 more than Florida scored last year. So it's a significant bump in offense, and it's going to be interesting to see. It's sort of the irresistible force meeting the immovable object here with Florida's offense not being able to score much at all last year, but Colorado State's defense really couldn't stop anybody either. So 361 points given up last year compared to 300 for Florida, but certainly that was sort of a down year for the Gators. From a quarterback perspective, like you said, KJ Carter Samuels is coming into Colorado State. He is a 4-star recruit. Went to Washington, I believe, and now is a grad transfer starting at Colorado State. So it's a brand new quarterback. So you can't really necessarily believe that the success that Bobo had last year with his incumbent is going to transfer over. But this is the kind of guy who probably would be able to do that sort of thing if in fact his pedigree says that he would be able to. If you look at what he did while he was at Washington, not real good, but only 47 pass attempts, but he only averaged 6.6 yards per attempt. He rushed 15 times and really just did not, had negative yardage in those rushes. So not real productive there. In high school, he completed 54% of his passes, 9.5 yards per completion. He did run at a 5 yard per rush clip though. So 129 runs for 632 yards. So that is something I think you can look for. Colorado State and Bobo's offense isn't necessarily predicated on the quarterback running, but in this case, I think Carter Samuels has some of those skills that Bobo's going to have to use in order to be successful, because he's not somebody who's highly accurate. It's not somebody that you would expect to see in like in an air raid offense or something like that, where he's chucking it all over the place and completing 70% of his passes. That's just not who Carter Samuels is.
Yeah, you probably could go back if you wanted to look at Mike Bobo and a type of offense. Aaron Murray had some mobility. And Carter Samuels probably has a little more than he does. So it maybe just be where it kind of plays out that it's just really another dimension to the attack. You're still going to play within that offense that we saw at Georgia for so long. Though this was an offense that was ranked 11th in the nation last year. We mentioned everything they lost, but if Carter Samuels can kind of live up to that 4-star billing, use his legs as a part of his attack, then maybe he's the guy that can help keep that offense at a pretty high rate. And going back to Carter Samuels, as you mentioned, he sat behind Jake Browning at Washington. But then he had to go somewhere else, but he wasn't going to play at Washington, of course. Transferred to UCLA. Wilson Speight from Michigan goes to UCLA. So you kind of saw what happened there. He won't be able to play much there. And also, Chip Kelly's now head coach at UCLA. So probably a lot of things were coming into play there. But he has now a chance at Colorado State to really be the guy there and hopefully live up to that 4-star billing.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that people have sort of either accepted or still kind of mad about are these guys who find the place where they can find playing time and use the grad transfer rules to enable themselves to do that. So, Carter Samuels has 1 year left. He's certainly been in some college programs over the last 2 or 3 years learning offenses, and maybe that helps him make a quick transition, that he learned the Washington offense, learned the UCLA offense, and now he's going to have to learn the Colorado State offense. But at the end of the day, he's got 47 pass attempts in college, and we don't really have and not a high school record that screams star to me. So I think anytime you make a transition from a quarterback who put up numbers like Colorado State's quarterback did last year, I think, and really over the 4 years that he was there, I think you need to expect a little bit of a drop off. But offense hasn't really been the problem for Colorado State, and so I'm not sure that anybody's all that concerned. I mean, I think you kind of feel like. You feel like it's gonna carry on just because the structure's there, the players are there. You're in a conference where there's going to be a pretty decent offensive production from just about all the teams that are there. But defense is where you really start to get concerned.
Yeah, before we move to that side, they definitely have to replace Michael Gallup, as we said. Drafted by the Cowboys, caught 100 passes last year for a little over 1,400 yards. But now this year it's going to be probably the Johnson & Johnson show for Colorado State. Senior, I don't know how if I can say his name right, Olabisi Johnson. I'm going with that, Will. There we go.
That's what I would have done.
Yeah, I'm this way. we're not going to pretend to know a whole lot about Colorado State. This is just a whole lot of research going into this. So. But he was second on the team last year with 41 catches. But they also get a big Tennessee transfer, Preston Johnson, who's coming in. So look, they're going to have some transfers of Carter Samuels and now Preston Williams. My bad. So it won't be the Johnson. So I made I tried to make a joke up, but it didn't work there. As I said, yeah, don't know a whole lot about him. But I do remember Preston Williams, being the Tennessee guy, suspended after being arrested last year. Now he transfers over to Colorado State, 6'4", 210 pound wide receiver, really fast, a lot of athleticism. Apparently, this past spring, he really showed out at wide receiver there.
Yeah, well, they're going to have to hope so because, like you mentioned, Gallup had 100 catches and averaged 14 yards a catch. Now, if you look at Olabisi Johnson, he had 41 catches for 595, so he averaged 14 and a half as well. Warren Jackson had 15 receptions for 265 yards, so 17.7. So they have some weapons there, and if Preston Williams, who a high 4-star caliber athlete, so he's somebody who people are really pushing and for Micah Pittman as a potential Gator. And he's rated higher than Pittman is. And so Preston Williams, at least coming out of high school, people thought was very good and didn't leave Tennessee because of performance concerns, but left because of legal ones, like you already mentioned. So, I think when you look at that, we mentioned in the Kentucky preview that they were bringing in a new quarterback and that they were bringing in a bunch of new receivers, or at least very unproven receivers. I think in this case, Colorado State has some proven receivers, and the question will be whether Carter Samuels or somebody else can step in and make those receivers successful. Because certainly last year under Nick Stevens, those guys were successful even if they were in secondary roles.
Yep, and now you mentioned the defense and the problems they've had there. We'll move over to that side of the ball now. Last year, Mike Bobo got rid of him. Defensive staff, they're gone after they gave up 27.8 points a game last year and 432 yards a game. Now steps in their new defensive coordinator, John Jancic. If he sounds familiar, he's a former Tennessee defensive coordinator. Last year, they struggled overall, but they did 18 takeaways. Pretty good stat there. 27 sacks. Not bad there either. But here we go. Top 2 pass rushers and 4 of the top 8 tacklers are gone. So, they struggled against the run last year, giving up 200. They struggled up there against the run, but they also gave up 245 yards passing as well. So this is when Jancic comes in, he's going to have his work cut out for him.
And the defensive stat I like looking at is yards per play. That to me, all of a sudden takes pace out of it, because you're not looking at, if a team runs 80 plays, they can give up 400 and something yards. And it's not terrible because it's divided by 80 rather than divided by 60. So Colorado State was 108th out of all against FBS opponents, gave up 6.3 yards per play. So if you compare that to some of the teams like Alabama, who gave up 3.9 yards per play. So, almost 3 full yards more than what Alabama was giving up, and that or I guess 2.5 yards more than Alabama was giving up. But on a per play basis, that's a significant jump. So yeah, they were not real good last year on defense. It is reflective in the number of points they gave up, and also in sort of the underlying stats as well. And hopefully the new defensive coordinator is bringing some of those bricks from Tennessee, because he's going to need them. Because like you said, they've lost some of the guys who were their leading tacklers last year. And I'm not necessarily sure that they're shoring that up anymore. They do have Josh Watson, who was their leading tackler last year, who's coming back. So he had 109 tackles, but he's a middle linebacker, and he only had 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, which to me indicates that the defensive line is getting occupied, and he's being forced to make some tackles after they've gotten blown back a little bit. Because otherwise, if the defensive line was doing its job, a middle linebacker with that many tackles would have a lot more tackles behind the line of scrimmage. There's just not a lot of explosion on the Colorado State defense, and to be honest, I'm not sure we should expect it from them. They're not necessarily, they're certainly not highly rated recruits. This is something where this isn't playing Charleston Southern, but this isn't playing Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky, from a talent profile, is significantly better than Colorado State. And so, the expectation for Florida should be a win, and a convincing one.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that convincing win should be, look, when just by thinking, when an SEC team plays a Mountain West team, automatically you should think physicality, you should think being able to push them around. And that's definitely what should happen in this game. They're not big up front at all. Projected starters on their defensive line, 275-pound average. So this is where Florida should be able to use that offensive line, use that experienced offensive line, and do what Dan Mullen wants to do best, and that is just submit at defense into just by running and running and running over them time after time again.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the overall, Colorado State is 82.2 in the 24/7 recruiting rankings for the starting 22. Florida's at 91.3, so 9 percentage points higher. I mean, it's really the difference between sort of a lower 4-star candidate and a lower 3-star candidate is what we're looking at in terms. So, from maybe a top 250 player to a, top 2,000 player. It's sort of the difference in here. And if you look at the defensive line, which again is a place that I tend to look, Colorado State's even lower. So they're at 81.7 and Florida's at 91.8. So to your point, the idea of being able to knock them back and run the ball it's not as if they have 3 studs in the defensive line who are going to be able to hold up and allow those linebackers to roam. They just don't have them there, and it's going to cause problems. And there's a reason why they have struggled on defense, and part of it is just a talent thing. It's a lot easier to cover up some of those gaps on offense and talent than it is on defense. And so Bobo's got his work cut out for him, especially in this game.
Yeah, and another thing too is when you run the ball like this, you should be getting third and short situations for your offense there. And last year for Colorado State, that allowed teams to convert 44% of their third down chances there. So, Will, when it's all said and done, we've looked at the offense, we've looked at the defense. Florida should be 3-0 after this game.
I mean, 3 home games, the talent profiles of each of the teams are significantly worse than the Gators. Dan Mullen has a history of being able to beat teams that have less talent than he does at Mississippi State, at least. And so, yeah, the expectation is that Florida needs to be 3-0 out of the gate, and they have to be 3-0 out of the gate because it's not, it gets much, much harder after this. And if they're 2-1 going into the stretch on the road that's coming up, they're going to have some issues.
All right. Well, I think we did it again. That was a good one.
Hey,
for a team we don't know a whole lot about.
Well, it is interesting when you look at this because I hadn't really realized the difference in talent between the Mountain West teams and the lower tier SEC teams. I mean, so if we look at the talent profile of Kentucky, they're at 87.1 and Colorado's at 82.2. So even when you look at teams that don't recruit well in the SEC compared to a team that's middle of the pack in the Mountain West, it's just night and day difference. And so when people talk about how much more difficult it is to win in the SEC, this is what they're talking about: is that you're playing a team way better than Colorado State every week. And even if you look at Vanderbilt, they're at 85.6. So Vanderbilt has significantly more talent than Colorado State. And so, yeah, Florida should win this game because they're playing a team that's worse than Vanderbilt.
Absolutely. So there we go. Our Colorado State preview. Next one is going to be pretty big. It's Dan Mullen's first big, huge rivalry game. It'll be Florida-Tennessee.
Hey, man, I'm going to be at that one. I'm excited.
Yeah, there we go. All right, Will be at Rocky Top, and we'll preview that game next. You can find Will on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his work at readandreaction.com. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.